Hey guys, welcome back. Killer Cars, on episode 2. Again, I'm on my own tonight. Mercedes is at work, so eventually we'll get her on. So at the moment I'm just sort of filling in the ones that are sort of solos. And the ones that she obviously wants to do with me we'll be doing together. We're just going to start this episode off with a viewer's warning. So this episode will contain a lot of death, murder, and, crimes against women, and it's getting pretty rough. So let's buckle in for this one. All right, so the episode name is Son of a Gun. Now, pause for what we all know that might be, and that is the son of Sam. David Richard Berkowitz. He was born Richard David Falco on June 1st, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, in the US, obviously. Unfortunately, he is still inhaling and exhaling. He's currently 69 years old and he's being held in a prison, which I'm hoping I'm going to get this right, but I think it's like Shawangan Correctional Facility. So David was born Richard David Falco, and within a couple of days of his birth, his mother Betty Broder put the little bloke up for adoption. She does have her reasons, which we will get to after. Betty was seeing a married man and had been seeing him for 3 years, called Joseph Kleinman, who is David's bio dad. There's no documentation as to why he gave him up, but it's believed Joseph threatened to leave her if she kept the baby and used his name, which is completely not cool or called for. She didn't get herself pregnant. Now, Betty had grown up in a Jewish family and was actually married to a man called Tony Falco before he actually left her for another woman. And sort of her meeting Joseph, she was like, well, I'll keep this bloke and I'll give the baby my ex-husband's name. Now, little Richard was adopted out, obviously. He was no longer wanted, but he was adopted by a young couple called Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz, who lived in the Bronx. They were a very young Jewish couple, and they were hardware store retailers and were childless, hence old mate's adoption. When they changed they sort of looked at his name and said, we're going to change it, but we don't want to mix it up too much. So all they did was just swap it around. So they rebranded him David Richard Berkowitz, which is who we know now today as the son of Sam. Now, they say David was somewhat troubled, and although he was super smart, he didn't take much to school, and in his early years became infatuated with petty crime and starting fires. Ding, ding, ding. Bit of a red flag. His parents tried to help him, and they took him to psychotherapists, and, they did all the right things that you could do as a parent, but flamey fingers. He carried on a bit. There's no documented record that he got into too much trouble. There's no legal record, there's no school record to say. But there is record the little arsehole went to 2 different schools, so whether he was sort of kicked out of one and went to another, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, when he was only 14, his mum Pearl died of breast cancer, and he was really starting to show signs of his dark side by this stage. And then obviously with his dad moving on and remarrying, he was in constant fights with him, and it really sort of put a goocher on that whole end of that family dynamic. So in 1971, at 17 years old, David joined the US Army, and he actually served at Fort Knox in the States and then in the infantry division in South Korea. After an honourable discharge in June of 74, he located his birth mother, Betty. But after a few visits, old Betty got a bit loose-lipped and told all the details of his birth and his bio dad, and that he actually had a sister that he didn't know about, and I guess that really sort of fucked with his head a little bit. I think it would fuck with anyone's head, He was really, really angry that there was, just this array of, reluctant father figures in his life, and it made him distraught. And sort of when they assessed him down the track, after he was caught, because, obviously he gets caught. A forensic anthropologist reported that this was his primary crisis in his life, which might have possibly been the turning point. Not ideal, I suppose, to get back from, a tour of duty and seeing that sort of shit, and then finding out that your mum chose to throw you away but keep your sister. And then also in the process find out that you have a sister. So yeah, he actually ceased contact with Betty not long after that. He continued to speak to his sister because obviously he realised it wasn't her fault just as much as it wasn't his fault. In 1975, he enrolled in the Bronx Community College for 1 year, but then was all over Red Rover. In 76, he became a taxi driver for a co-op taxi company. So then he sort of bounced around jobs, and by the time of his arrest, he was actually a postal. So talking about being arrested, during the 1970s, he made a real cunt of himself. He started to commit super violent crimes, and then he completely fucked up his first attempt of murder with a knife, which then obviously led to him using the handgun. But, his crime spree, it was in New York, it was in the Bronx, it was in Brooklyn, it was in Queens, and it started, and he was all they put an MO together, obviously, once they started linking it all up, but, he was always looking for thin white women with dark wavy hair, like that was his type. Each attack had a similar sort of MO, and it usually included 2 people in each attack. Now, December of 1975, David claims that he was only 22 years old. He committed his first attack on Christmas Eve. He used a hunting knife to stab a woman in Co-op City who hasn't been identified, but he has stated that she was Hispanic. So we're unsure, unfortunately, as to her wounds or if she's okay. In the same month, he attacked a high school student by the name of Michelle Truman. She was only 15 at the time, which is distressing. Michelle was stabbed 6 times while walking across a bridge. Luckily, Michelle is a bit of a little battler, and she survived. She actually got out of hospital only a week later, so God love her. While she couldn't confirm what her attacker looked like, it did sort of spook him enough, and he actually moved from that area and moved to Yonkers not long after. Yonkers, I like that town name. It's pretty cool. Now in July of 76, after failing to kill young Michelle, he started using a .44 calibre bulldog handgun, which he was super familiar with from being in the military. And on the 29th of July at around 1 a.m. in Pelman Bay of the Bronx, he attacked 18-year-old Donna. Now I can't apologise and the last name's wrong. I'm doing the best I can, don't come for me. So he actually attacked 18-year-old Donna Luria and her 19-year-old friend Jody Valenti. Both were in the medical field, and they were sort of sitting in Jody's car, and they were discussing work, and they were just about to call it quits when David approached as Donna was actually getting out of the car. Now, she looked up, seen him, obviously looked like he was quite shady, and she said, "Now what is this?" That's stated. And David's pulled his gun, and he took a knee, so I'm guessing he was still a fair way away, I'm not sure, but he's taken a knee and he's braced his elbow, and he's fired, and unfortunately he's fatally shot Donna in the face, which is, there you go. Now, he then fired rounds into Jody's car. He did hit her in the thigh, and the 3rd bullet missed both the girls, so Donna must have still been in the proximity of the door. He then ran away. Jody did survive the ordeal, and while she didn't recognise David, she did give a police description that he was around 5'8", about 100 kegs, short, dark, curly hair. Reports state that 2 separate people confirmed the identity when he was seen actually driving around the area in his hunting stage, I suppose you'd call it. Now, unfortunately, this sack of shit wasted no time, and on the 23rd of October in 76, a very, very similar scenario played out in Flushing, Queens. 20-year-old Carl Denaro and 18-year-old Rosemary Keenan was sitting in Rosemary's car parked when suddenly the window shattered. Now, Carl said he felt like the car had exploded, but some quick thinking from Rosemary, she's started the car and legged it. They're gone, and they got the fuck out of Dodge. Now, when they were stopped, obviously, and they'd realised that they'd been shot at, Carl had non-life-threatening bullet wound to his head, but was bleeding, and Rosemary had some cuts and abrasions from all the glass. Carl did actually have to have a piece of his skull replaced later on down the track, and now he's got a bit of steel in his head, but luckily they both survived. Neither of the kids saw David. By the time sort of Rosemary realised what was going on, she was out of there. They weren't hanging around, but they did find 44 calibre bullets in and around the car. Police still hadn't sort of linked the crimes yet. Young Rosemary's dad at the time was a 20-year vet of the police, and investigations were huge because of this, but they couldn't find a common enemy between the two. And it was later stipulated that David must have thought Carl was a woman because David had quite long hair at the time. Now again, unfortunately, wasting no time, David struck on the 27th of November in 76. Two high school students, 16-year-old Donna DeMasi and 18-year-old Joanne Lomino, had walked home from the movies just after midnight, and they were just sitting out front of their house, just chatting at Donna's home in Floral Park, when David approached them in a military uniform and was asking for directions. And no sooner did the girls sort of go to answer, like they didn't even get a chance to answer, he shot them both. Both girls survived, thankfully, but unfortunately Joanne did become paraplegic as she took a bullet to the back. A neighbour did put eyes on David this time, but he was reported at that time that he had blonde hair, so I don't know if he was sort of wearing a wig, whether he dyed his hair, if he was just changing up his appearance because he thought he might have been seen previously. Fast forward to the 30th of January of 1977 at 12:40 a.m, 26-year-old Christine Frund and fiancé 30-year-old John Deal was sitting in John's car in the Forest Hill station in Queens. After being at the movies and then preparing to go to another dance after, David approached the car and he put 3 rounds into it. John drove away to escape and only had superficial wounds, but unfortunately Christine was shot twice and later died in hospital about 7 hours later. Now again, neither John nor Christine saw David. With this attack gaining media coverage, police finally acknowledged that these shootings had a pattern and all the victims had been struck with the same caliber bullets, thus meaning they were connected. Now, they didn't think this at first and happened, as it happened in different precincts. They sort of, this person hadn't spoken to that person sort of went, oh yeah, we've had a murder, but we don't know much about it. So there was a bit of a communication breakdown with these guys, which caused them to there had to be a lot actually unfortunately happened before they were able to link it all. And like some people reported that he had dark hair, some people reported a military uniform. And once they sort of compiled all the evidence, they were able to produce a couple of composite sketches, but police stated that they were looking for more than one shooter, just as from what the description were given. Moving forward to the 8th of March in 1977, 19-year-old Columbia University student Virginia Veroskin, again, I apologise if I've got that wrong, was walking home from school when David confronted her with a pistol. Now, she tried to use her textbooks as a shield, but ultimately was struck by the bullet in the head. She was pronounced dead on the scene when they arrived. Virginia didn't live far from where Christine and John were attacked, so it was sort of a same area of consecutive attacks, which sort of really started to put the wind up, as to what was going on. Now, on the 17th of April of 1977 at 3 a.m, 20-year-old Alexander Azus, a tow truck driver, and his 18-year-old girlfriend, Valentina Surin, a college student, was sitting in Alex's brother's car on the Hutchinson River Parkway service road in the Bronx, which, side note, was not very far from Valentina's home and where he'd actually attacked Donna and Jody only 10 months earlier. Now, a nearby resident heard 4 gunshots ring out. When police attended, they found Valentina and Alexander had been shot in the head. Valentina had unfortunately died at the scene. Alexander died later in hospital. No witnesses, again, no one's seen anything other than the resident who heard the gunshots, and the only clues that were left were the 44 caliber bullets that were found. This time there was a note that was left on the bodies of Alexander and Valentina. It was addressed to NYPD Captain Joseph Borelli, and in the letter, David identified himself as the son of Sam. Before this, the press had named him the 44 caliber killer, But that all changed as soon as this letter came out. In the letter, he dribbled about his determination to keep killing and threw it in the police's face that they had no hope of figuring out who he was. And, I'm not going to read the whole letter. It is really long, and it doesn't make a whole heap of sense. It's really poorly written. He does refer to himself as Mr. Monster in this one, though. I will read the last line of it, though, because it's pretty disturbing. And, I guess it sort of just gives you a bit of a backstory on where his headspace was in this letter. But his letter said, "I say goodbye and good night. Police, let me haunt you with these words. I'll be back, I'll be back. To be interpreted as bang, 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 bang. Ugh. Yours in murder, Mr. Monster." Now, that alone is terrifying, but, that was their first letter. Now, he's sitting there that he refers to himself as Son of Sam, but then closes it with Mr. Monster, so go figure, I'm not sure. The letter was analysed by a lot of different professions, to which they got a whole lot of fuck all out of it. Really, after consulting with several psychiatrists, police released a press psychological profile of their suspect. On the 26th of May 1977, they described him as neurotic and someone who possessed signs of paranoid schizophrenia, who may believe is under some sort of demonic possession. So David went on to use that in later of his case, but we'll touch base on that. Naturally, old Mr. Invincible couldn't help himself and replied straight away on the 30th of May to the Daily News columnist called Jimmy Breslin, again dribbling shit that no bib can wipe. But they did find that letter was posted on the same day, and that letter was posted from Englewood in New Jersey. So we're starting to see a bit of a pattern in the maps of where he's been, but it's not giving us sort of a pinpoint where he is. On the back of the envelope, though, it read, "Blood and family, darkness and death, absolute depravity," and then .44. So it was sort of his way of identifying himself without too much fuck around, I think. Now, this second letter that came was completely different to the first letter that they found on the bodies, right? It was super well written, punctuated, and went on and on and on about him being the son of Sam. A lot of almost biblical sort of references, but also demonic references, obviously, where he picked up from, his profile that was given out, and just a plain old pile of poopy in a bag that was set on fire. Like, it was just crap. Under his moniker that he left, there was a logo, and it was like a small sketch of like 7 different symbols. And there was also a threat that said, "What would you have for the July 29th? Now, obviously, when Jimmy's received this letter, he immediately got the police involved. When they examined the letter, police sort of took the statement about the 29th as like an ominous threat, because would he strike again? But then they also realised that would also be the first anniversary of the Luria shooting. So unsure if that's what he meant, or if he was just sort of admitting to that first shooting. Being that there was such a huge difference in the letters, police began to dig further in, so far so that they even made contact with DC Comics, as police thought the letter was almost created in an art studio by someone who maybe specialised in printing or calligraphy or graphic design. It was, like I said, it was from what was on the body to what they received here was complete chalk and cheese. They even assumed down to the fact that this person may possibly been a comic book letterer. Now, meanwhile, New York is terrified. Women are cutting their hair, changing the colour of their hair, and just in general taking huge steps to not be alone in the open. Reports were saying that wigs and hair dye were just unavailable at the time and sold out because these women are terrified. You've got a man just approaching people in cars and on the street and shooting them dead. or shooting them and you know, causing them serious harm. So, you know, it was widely documented on the means that women were going to keep themselves safe. And, you know, but like he's just killed a man too, so no one's safe, you know. And whilst they put this, you know, thing out saying, oh, you know, he goes for white women with dark wavy hair, but, you know, we're only a couple of victims in and we've already killed a man, you know. So I think the profile that they originally put out, it was more so, you know, what they found was terrifying for people and not so much what was a profile of the people he was after. I think he was more an opportunist killer at this stage. Now, June rolls around in 1977. It was the 26th of June. Sal Lupo, a 20-year-old mechanics offsider, and 17-year-old Judy Placido, who had just graduated high school. Now, they just left the pub at Bayside of Queens, and they were sitting in Sal's motor car when 3 gunshots rang out. Sal was hit in the forearm and Judy in the right temple. She was also struck in the shoulder and back. Now, luckily, again, both of these guys survived. I'm starting to honestly think that David could knit water if he fell out of a boat. He's got some serious, like, Star Trooper aim here because, yeah, the amount of bullets he's put into people and not killing them is pretty wild. Now, Sal and Judy both didn't see his attacker, but someone else did. A passerby saw it happen and then gave a description of a tall, dark-headed man in trackies fleeing in a car, and was able to even supply a partial number plate. So you can start to feel the pressure starting to boil around this fuckbag. With the anniversary of the first original .44 calibre shooting approaching, police set out like a dragnet to try and find this bloke. Emphasised around past areas, used to, you know, that he used in his hunting grounds. I say that in air quotes. And, you know, so they really sort of focused on Queens and the Bronx. But unfortunately, the next shooting occurred in Brooklyn. So on the 31st of July, Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Volonte, both just turned 20, were sitting in Robert's car having a cheeky make-out sesh after a successful first date. David approached the vehicle, and from only 3 feet away, he opened fire. 4 rounds entered the car and hit both occupants in the head. Robert lost his left eye but survived, where unfortunately Stacey lost her life. This obviously was a huge thing at this point, you know, because they've done everything in their power to help and stop these things from happening, but it hasn't. This prompted the Son of Sam task force, led by Detective John Falatico, and the start of David's capture, pretty much. The next big hint came from a young lady who was walking her dog when she came across the crime scene from Stacey and Robert. She saw an officer there, and he was actually ticketing a car that was parked in front of a fire hydrant. And so after the officer left, she observed this young fellow walking past, but she said she instantly felt unsafe and said it was like he was almost studying her. She could see a dark object in his hand, and that was enough for her. Her and her dog, they legged it. They were gone. So as soon as she got to her steps, she could recall hearing another 4 gunshots ring out. Now, she was terrified. She ran upstairs, locked herself away. She's rang the police about it the following day, and police started checking all the cars that were ticketed in that area that night. And old David's custard-coloured Ford Galaxy was one of them. Now, by the 8th of August, they wanted to speak to David. NYPD Detective James Justice, funnily enough, last name, rang the Yonkers Police Department. I love that name, Yonkers. I want to live in Yonkers. And asked them to bring him in. Now, funnily enough, the young girl at the desk there knew David and was actually his neighbour. She also let loose that this fuckbag had actually shot and wounded their black Labrador, Harvey. Harvey was this young girl's dad's dog, and, you know, luckily Harvey survived, but still, you know, not great. But just keep in the back of your mind that her dad's name was Sam. Yep. By the time this conversation had ended, the Yonker Police Department, who were speaking with James Justice, say they were pretty sure that David Berkowitz may just be the son of Sam. Now, knowing all of this, on the following day, on the 10th of August in 1977, police went and located David's car, and it was parked outside of his building at 35 Pine Street in Yonkers. So they saw in the car, there was a gun on the back seat, and no one was around, and the car was unlocked. They searched quickly through the car, and they found a duffel bag full of ammo and maps of the crime scenes, and they also found a threatening letter meant to go to Inspector Timothy Down of the Son of Sam Task Force. They decided to wait for David to come out, and that it was probably better for him to be outside of the premises. So if there was a shootout, it wasn't going to be in like small apartment style hallways. And they also rang in for a search warrant for both the car and his premises. Now, they were sort of covered for the car if they didn't get a warrant, because the gun was visible. And whilst it wasn't illegal to own that gun in New York, it was still grounds because it was left unattended. When the warrant still hadn't been approved, but they saw David come out that night at 10 p.m. and enter his car, Detective John Folotico said, "Fuck it," and went for it. He approached on the driver's side, and his partner, Detective Sergeant William Gardella, covers the passenger side. And it was a really weird exchange between John and David. And he said as soon as he went to the passenger side, he said, "Show me your hands." And David's just turned around with this big, inexplicable smile on his face and said, "Well, you've got me." Now, that sort of threw John, and John sort of replied back and said, "Right, who have I got?" And David came back with like this really menacing voice and said, "You know." John came back at that and said, "No, I don't, you tell me." And David looked him dead in the eyes and said, "I am Sam." Now, John was like, "Sam, okay." John was like, "Sam who?" David replied, David turned around and said, "Sam," and then paused, "David Berkowitz." So I don't know if he thought for a second, or if he slipped up, or if he referred to himself as Sam in third person. I'm not sure. Now, John was officially credited the capture of David as the son of Sam, and it's said that the warrants came through not long after. Now, they searched his car and his premises. They found the 44 calibre Bulldog handgun and a lot of ammo in the car with David in a brown paper bag. So he was obviously on his way out that night armed. Now, in the house, once they got inside, it was a mess. It was in complete disarray, and there was, satanic symbols painted all over the walls, and it was just a mess. And they also found a heap of diaries that he had now, and it's sort of dated back until from when David was 21 years old now. So they found 3 full notebooks, nearly all full, meticulously kept, and noted hundreds of arsons, like super well noted hundreds of arsons. Once they went through, though, they suspected that he was actually the person that lit over 1,400 fires in New York. Now, other interesting fact about where he was living, they actually changed the name, or they actually changed the address of the apartment complex to 42 Pine Street, as no one would live there, with the old address being tied to the son of Sam. So by 1 a.m. on the 11th, by this stage, David was being held at the 60th Precinct Coney Island station when the mayor came to see David personally. After a brief wordless sort of meeting, they left, they sort of left it at that. They got nothing from him, but the mayor did go straight into a press conference and sort of pushed it out to New York that they've caught him and that everyone's safe, and they have the son of Sam. Now, it only took 30 minutes of interrogation on the 11th of August to get a confession. He confessed to shooting all of them, he confessed to all of the shootings, and instantly said he would plead guilty. So you remember the neighbour's dog, right? You remember me saying, keep this in the back of your mind. Well, David claims that the dog was one of the reasons that he killed, stating that the dog demanded the blood of pretty young girls, and that Sam came from his neighbour, Sam Carr, and that the black lab who was possessed by an ancient demon that issued irresistible commands for David to kill. I can't even. I think it's all piss and wind, if you ask me. You know, I'm not an expert by any stretch. A few weeks after being locked up, for some reason he was granted access to communication with the press, which has got me fucked, but, you know, it is what it is. But, yeah, anyways, on September 19th of 1977, he alluded to his original story of being possessed and then closed out saying that there was more sons out there, you know, more sons of Sam's, and it wasn't just him. Fucking snore. All right, buddy, no worries. But, you know, 1979 rolls around, he's in a press conference, and all of a sudden, no, he'd sort of really dropped the whole I was possessed, you know, and the possession pony, and he actually picked up on the, oh, my daddy didn't want me carriage, and sort of ran with that one for the rest of his time. So, you know, all the shit that he said about poor old Harvey, the black lab, was just all shit, which we sort of gathered. They had 3 different shrinks sort of have a go at him, assess him before his court date on the 8th of May in 1978. And their findings were that whilst he was loopy, it was not grounds to claim not guilty by reason of insanity, which was good. But then David sort of refused to use that anyways, and he pled guilty to all the shootings. So 2 weeks later, and, you know, we're at sentencing, and this spanner has tried to jump out of a window, which caused a big scene as the window was 7 stories up. He then went on to scream some obscenities about his last victim, and, you know what, I'm not going to repeat it because, you know what, fuck him. Not here for it. No, ma'am. No, not doing it. That girl did nothing to him. He was later sentenced to 25 to life for each of the murders, and they were to be served consecutively. He served time in Sing Sing Prison, Clinton Correctional for psych evaluations. Then he was shipped to Central New York Psych Center until he was then sent from there to Attica Correctional Facilities, which is a supermax up in upstate New York. He was there for over a decade, and then from there he was moved to Sullivan Correctionals in 1990 for a few years, but that didn't stick either. And then finally he was sent to Shawangunk Correctional Facility in the Ulster County. Now, the shit thing was, though, he was actually eligible for parole after 25 years, but thankfully, he's not out. In 1979, someone did try to do him in prison, and unfortunately we were unsuccessful. They did slash his throat, though, which, you know, required a lot of stitches and that. He did survive, but when they asked him who did it, he claimed that it was punishment and I deserved it. Wow. Nice white flag, mate. No worries. Now, he is entitled to a parole hearing every 2 years. That's mandated, but he either usually wouldn't show up or he would ask them to cancel it, which was not heard of at the time. He did attend one, and in that he said that, in all honesty, I believe that I deserve to be in prison for the rest of my life. I have God's help and long ago come to terms with my situation and have accepted my punishment. So you fucking should. Well, go on, son. No pun intended, but I'm afraid your victims don't feel the same way. Being all coy is fucking useless, really. Now, his solicitor, I don't know how they do it. Like, I understand that people have to work, but how do you defend against something like this is beyond me. But his solicitor has obviously tried to get parole for him before and has, you know, said that the prison staff see him as a model prisoner. Let me just pause in disapproval of anyone saying that about anyone that takes someone else's life for no reason other than a thrill kill. Like, Anyways, in most recent attempts for parole, they've actually been shit canned because of good old COVID. Now, the commissioner at the time said, look, nothing we can do. Too bad, so sad. Suck a fat one. So there was a few people that have assessed David over the years, especially when he was talking shit about cults and all that sort of crap. But sort of what stood out to me in all my findings of this sack of shit was FBI profiler John E. Douglas stated that David was an introverted loner not capable of being involved in group activity. So doesn't that just sort of fist your cult story in the arse, old mate? Like, you can't, the old saying that my partner says, you can shit in one hand and want in the other and see which one fills up first. But, every person that has done an assessment on this bloke have said the same thing, that he doesn't play well with others. Sorry, no hat, no play. Now, he was obviously approached a lot by people that wanted to write books and memoirs and make movies, which there are movies out there, and TV series, which is, whatever. But luckily enough, New York City actually passed a law that states that convicted criminals are not allowed to make any financial profits from books or movies or any other enterprises related to the stories of their crimes. So, sorry, Davey, you're shit out of luck on getting paid, mate, so you can keep yammering, but you're just bumping jaws because you're not bumping coin. To wrap this one up, I honestly didn't want to give him too much airtime. He's completely out of control, and it's terrifying to think that he's still alive. I'm finding it difficult to speak about him because he is still alive, and I think I'm probably not going to do too many more of these. My heart goes out to all of his victims, and may all of them find either peace in rest or peace in themselves, because it's a hell of a thing to live through, to be shot by someone that you haven't even seen their face, and to survive would leave scars. And for the unfortunate people that did lose their lives, it's not any better for their family, because they also have to live with knowing that this guy's still alive. So yeah, that's that, and I'm just going to put a pin in it for David Richard Berkowitz. I don't want to give him, like I said, I don't want to give him too much more. Now, to end this on a high note, like we do every episode, the most important part. So yeah, one of the things I did mention was his custard-coloured Ford Galaxy. Now, I do love me a Ford. Now, it was a four-door, so nothing too fancy. I don't have specifics on the vehicle itself, but I'm just from what I can gather from photos, which I will post on Instagram, was that it was a 1970 Ford Galaxy four-door. Now, to buy these new, they were only $3,000 to $3,500, depending on sort of what options you got. Now, even today, depending on condition, they usually run from around the $30,000 or more. Now, I can't see him being a V8 man, and from what I can see on the car itself, because there aren't a whole heap of photos of the car to give me sort of distinguishing features, but I'm going to guess that it was a 250 cubic inch six-cylinder. Now, again, wouldn't pull the skin off a rice custard, only 112 kilowatts or 150 horsepower, about 300 newton meters of torque. Top speed of this vehicle was 161 kilometers per hour, or 100 miles per hour. Acceleration, I had a bit of a giggle of this because I went deep on this one. Acceleration 0 to 60 miles per hour was in 13.4 seconds, or 0 to 100 kilometers an hour was 14.3. Fuel consumption and mileage of this motor car was 14.8 litres to the 100 kilometres, or 19.1 miles per gallon. Now, being a 70s Falcon, it would have been running a Borg Warner T150 trans, and they were 3 on the tree, which was cool, and still is cool. I don't care what anyone says. And obviously rear wheel drive. It, like I said, was a sedan, and custard yellow. I didn't look up the original paint code colour for it because custard yellow just sounds better. Now, this thing was a land whale. So it was 5.5 meters long, 2 meters wide, and it weighed just over 1,700 kilograms, or 3.5 ton. Now, it ran drum brakes all the way around, but there was an option for discs way back when, but that was usually only when you went to the 298 motor. Now, again, without knowing the vehicle without having a good look at it. I can, or the only thing I can really give you is what it tells me would have been the options at the time. In 1970, they did do a minor trim change, and they did swap the ignition lock over to the other side of the steering column. 1970 was the last year of the 1970 XL, and there was 351,938 Galaxies or 6-cylinder Galaxies made that year. It was Davy's main ride and mode of transport, and unfortunately it was what brought him undone in the end, which was cool because that's it was used for a crime, it was used in the crime, and it was what brought him unstuck, and that's what he gets for parking in front of fire hydrants and chasing girls with dogs, because at the end of the day was the contributing factor to him going end of story. He didn't have any other cars, and he didn't have a collection, and again, doesn't deserve one and never will have one. I think he was more interested in talking shit and taking lives than he was in motor cars, but yes. So all in all, this episode is now complete. We're going to put one down for Ford. So last week was a Porsche, this week's Ford. And next week we will find another car again. So thanks for coming, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I hope to see you guys. Please remember, I'm now on Spotify, on Anchor, and on YouTube. So yeah, I will see you guys next time, and thanks for listening. And just to add to the end of that, if you are enjoying it, please like and subscribe, and turn your notifications on, and that way you will know every time I upload. But anyway, guys, like I said, stay safe out there, stay away from creeps in custard coloured Galaxies, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.